Welcome to the Sandwich Generation podcast, a resource for adults balancing the dual responsibilities of raising children and caring for aging parents. Whether you're helping your parents downsize, explore real estate options, navigating caregiving, or looking for practical advice to help your family thrive, this is the place for you. Join us as we bring you expert insights, heartfelt stories, and actionable items to support you and your family within this unique generation. Hello.
I was dancing to that intro. I just love it. You did such a great job on that, Sara.
Thank you. Well, I'm Sara McCord.
I'm Lisa Treadwell. We have a guest with us today who was one of our past clients. And so I'm going to bring her on and let her start by telling her story. I don't want to give away too much detail. Welcome, Leanne. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to dive into your story.
Pleasure, Lisa. Thanks for having me. Anything we can do to support each other as we go through the sandwich generation is worth investing in. So I'm happy to.
For sure. Did you know what the sandwich generation was? Or did you have to look it up at all? Okay.
Yeah. I had children later in life, so I was managing my my children as teenagers and going through this at the same time, young adults, and so lots going on in the sandwich generation for sure.
That's the sandwich generation. All right. Well, tell us about your story, your parents you mentioned, and sort of your role from as you can start as far back as you want or start wherever you want. And like I told you earlier, give as much or as little detail as you'd like.
Right. So this, my story is mostly about my mom, who passed away just over a year ago. My dad passed away 23 years ago, so he's been, out of the picture. But my mom was in her own home and very much wanted to stay there. And for me, I wanted to honor that wish as long as I possibly could. But as I started seeing things, as you look back, I think the the mental deterioration probably started 2 or 3 years ago. And so keeping her in her own home became even more of a challenge. And of course, she didn't want to get, so picture a 4-bedroom home, about 3,000 square feet, from which nothing had been removed since 1968 when we moved in. Right?
Yeah, you were raised there. You were raised in that house, right?
I just went through like middle school and high school, but I do have one sibling who spent his entire life in that. We're 10 years apart, so we had a very different life experience, especially at the beginning of our life. So I spent some time trying to say, we need to start getting rid of stuff, and the response was, quite frankly, well, you get to do that after I die. I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Oh, from your mom, that was her response.
Somebody in their 80s, you only battle so much. They don't have too many years left, and I didn't want to spend those years battling with her. I knew that would place a bigger burden on me and my sibling when we got there, but which it did indeed do. So, So she passed away when she was 92 3/4. She spent all but the last 2.5 months in her own home, which I consider a victory.
For sure.
And then the end was difficult as she started to have more obvious mental issues and physical issues. She just couldn't be by herself. So we hire people to come into the house. But I will say that another thing I've uncovered, and I'll be direct about this, is you don't want to be old and underfunded. Old and poor in the United States is a terrible thing.
Oh gosh.
That's,
I mean, that's a whole rabbit trail that we could go down for sure.
Yeah.
exactly. So the biggest stress for me was, how are we going to pay for the support that she needs? All of her funds were basically tied up in the house, right?
Got
So I
it.
was trying to
Yeah.
tell her while she was ill, manage the sibling interaction, try to figure out where we were going to get the funding out of the house, all those kinds of things at the same time that she declined. And it turned out, of course, you worry about these things, and she passed away, so we didn't end up having to spend a lot of money. But, you still have to plan for those things, right? You still have to manage that situation.
Right. Saying, what was your role in that? You, as the older child, did you have like, of the two, did you have a power of attorney? Did you have directives, healthcare directives? What sort of, what was your role?
Yeah. So luckily, and I advise everybody to look into this, at least explore it, is that we set up an irrevocable trust. I was the trustee of the irrevocable trust. Because everything was in the trust, it simplified everything that we had to do at the end of her life. I can't imagine what it would be like, what it would have been like if you had to go to probate, which you have to do, even if you have a will, and even if you're the executor of the will, you still have to go to probate court, and there's a lot more issues can come up if there's disagreement among siblings. So that trust was invaluable, and it was still hard. It was still difficult, but without that, it would have been a nightmare. And you have also.
And by the way, you were managing this from another state. You were not local.
That's 4 hours away in another state. That's correct. Which had, of course, its own complications. With which Indy real estate experts was very helpful. So that's one of the things I truly
we appreciate that for sure.
Yeah.
We will definitely be diving more into that topic at a later date when we have an elder law attorney on. But I wanted to ask you, with that, putting that in place, was that something that you started the conversation with your mom, or is that something that she kind of came up with and thought she would put in place herself, or were you involved in getting that in place?
Yeah, she actually, through her church, went to an event where an elder law firm spoke, other firm that specialized in elder law, and she got the idea, and so she came to me and asked if I thought it was worth the investment, because it does take some investment, and again, she didn't have a ton of money, so everything, right, the expenditure was a pretty big one for her. But I did the research and looked into it, reviewed it with my siblings who were mixed on their feedback. I said, I think we ought to go ahead and do this. And so it was her idea. Then she found out, then she found out that the irrevocable trust gives control to the trustee. Through a lot of conversations, I was like, do you think that I would take your right? You trusted me with this, So we had those kind of conversations, and she finally decided that it was the best thing to do, and we got that trust put in place.
Those conversations, just in and of themselves, I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, and as I was thinking about this discussion, I thought, what is the advice I would pass on to people? It's to have the conversation. It's much harder later to not have had the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though they're difficult and parents don't necessarily want to have them, it's really critical to not only have the conversation, but document what was discussed or decided.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best advice you could give, because we preach it all the time, like, have the conversation early, have it now, have it before you're in a critical situation, and like you mentioned, it sounds like
Right.
hindsight was you were whether it was still hard, but you're glad that those things were in place, even if it did, it was a bit of an investment for your mom.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and even though I had a lot of the conversations, when things started to get difficult, she did not remember.
Yeah.
Right? She did not remember the decision that was made.
Right.
And so if you have documentation, at least you have it written down or in an email or whatever that you can go back to and say, hey, look, we talked about this. The other thing I would do is share it with your siblings. Share it with any other member that are involved and say, this is what was decided, so that nobody is surprised when things get difficult, when you get into those emergency situations.
So you shared the conversations that you were having with your mother before she passed. You shared these with your sibling and documented it. What was that like?
Well, I will say that in the instance of the trust, I did. In the instance of any other things, I did not.
So you really had to balance what you were sharing and what you were not.
I should have shared more. I should have documented more. I should have shared more. I should have been more specific.
And for the most part, we've had siblings who it was fine. It might have gotten a little awkward here and there. I mean, for the most part, I know that Sara and I can both count on probably just one hand, a handful where it didn't go great. And, we managed to work through it and got that, but it's certainly not ideal. So you're saying have more conversations and document them, communication and document it.
Cool. Yeah.
That's great advice.
What do you have, Sara? Did you want to ask any questions?
I kind of wondered about the emotional aspect for you. Was it difficult? Obviously it's difficult. I don't mean that, but once your mom, you had decided that she couldn't stay at home, and then once she passed and you're trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with all the things in the house and all that stuff? How was that emotionally for you? Because I know I've had clients where I've had adult children that can't go back into the family house after their parents have passed. They don't want to see it any differently than what they remember it. And then I've had others that are like, nope, I'll be here every time you're here and I'm going to help, So how was the emotional piece of that for you?
It was interesting when you asked me the question, Sara. The first word that popped into my head was lonely.
Lonely?
I have my siblings live further away than I do, right, so on East Coast. So no one else, I was the closest at 4 hours away. So I was having to deal with a lot of things on my own, which kind of gets your question. This was the second time that I've had to move an elderly relative out of their home. And I will tell you, it feels like you're throwing someone's life away.
Yeah.
All those little things that they kept because they were special to them, or achievements, or I'll give you an example. My mother's bowling trophies. The woman has a bowl in the 60s, right? But to hold those, I think I don't want to take those to my house, right? And leave it for my kids to pass, right? So it's things like that are so hard to deal with, because it's got to get done. You can't sit on it. You got to do something. So you have to
put up an emotional wall.
Yeah. And of course,
Yeah.
that doesn't help with relationships with other people who are grieving, right? That it's
Yeah.
another stress on the whole system. So,
Right.
Yeah.
It's tough to act rationally in those situations and completely turn off your emotions in that situation, which I think is why, a lot of times it's helpful to have a third party.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I can talk a little bit about how I ended up working with Lisa. One of my siblings said they wanted to purchase the house, and said we didn't need anything legal and it was going to be fine. And I thought, I'm not comfortable selling a home without somebody who knows what they're doing. And I talked to a number of people, got Lisa's name from a friend of my mother's, and contracted with Lisa just to make sure that the closing went smoothly legally in the state of Indiana and was fine. And what ended up happening was that wanted to purchase the home was not able to get financing, and so there was a lot of struggle there. I wanted to be able to help my sibling do what he wanted to do, but I had to do as the trustee of the estate. Or the trust. I had to do it legally and so forth. So Lisa and Indy real estate experts were very helpful in, first of all, making sure that everything was legally in order, and when we couldn't get it in order, helping me through the transition of dealing with the sibling to get us out of that situation, so we were able to put the house on the market. So that third party was essential in my own sanity, trying to get through that particular situation.
Yeah, I forgot all of the little nuances,
wow.
but we certainly did have to make sure that we were clearing the title, that you were going to end up being clear and free from that title and not have any, responsibility in terms of the property after it's sold. And so we had to shift a little bit in our original plan, and that was thanks to also some good title companies and your diligence and hard work and patience and having tough conversations.
Yeah, there were a lot of tough conversations in that scenario. A lot of tough conversations.
Yeah.
And I think one message is that I got out of this whole thing. The only thing I can do to make it, I can't go back and make it better, but I can make things easier for my kids, right?
Yes,
I can only
absolutely.
So by not doing anything to get rid of the things in the house, by not communicating well, not all these things, it made it much more difficult for the siblings. And I will say that my sibling relationships were strained from this experience.
They were quite strained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a parent myself, I want to make sure I have everything in place, and I talk to my children and I tell them what's going on, and I tell them what my wishes are, so that they don't have to argue about it, or there's as much clarity as possible at the end of their life, so that they don't have to argue each other about it. Right?
Yeah.
I think
that's good.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, because you mentioned that, your mom said, I'm not getting rid of anything yet. You'll deal with that after the fact. And I think we hear that frequently, where people will say, like, well, I'm not going to worry about it because I'm not going to have to worry about it. That's on you. That's on my kids or whatever.
Right.
But I think in hindsight, if people could see what it can create with the the issues and the conflict and the emotional aspects that come up after they're gone, if they saw the strain that it can have on their children, they would take that back. They would try to get rid of some of those things, and because they would rather do that than to see what could potentially happen on the back end. And I think more people need to hear about that so that they know, okay, this is going to benefit my kids and help my kids. It's not something that they should have to, potentially lose their relationship over because I decided I didn't want to designate who got what or get rid of things. That's hard. So,
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Really great points. Besides all of that, were there any surprises, anything unexpected?
I will think I learned, and this is kind of like, you go through it once and you learn it, and then you kind of never have to use it again. But
Right.
one of the things I learned was that the medical system in the United States, and I'll tell you what book I got this from. The medical system in the United States is there to make people better. And there comes a point in our lives when we're not going to get better. We need to get, it's more important that we're comfortable. So, and this is from a book called Being Mortal, Changed my
I love that book.
Yeah,
that's a great book.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. Even if you don't agree with this, what the guy says, it brings you a different perspective than we're all used to.
Being mortal.
In the last couple of months of her life, my mother ended up in the emergency room and in the hospital a number of times, and they are not trained to handle the elderly. They are trained to get people in, get them better, get them out.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I won't name names or give you the detailed description, but it was a horrible experience a number of different times, because if everything's wrong with someone elderly, they take them to the emergency room, and those were always a disaster. And gerontologists, is that what doctors who specialize in the elderly, I think, are extremely important. It's a specialty that's undervalued. I was very grateful for them. And then I was also grateful for the rehab centers and people who specialize in dealing with the elderly, because they're very experienced. They know how to do it to minimize disruption. And then I've also learned a lot about hospice, what hospice really is. Hospice says, we're going to keep them comfortable. And I wish that I had done hospice earlier.
Oh, for sure. A lot of the hospice workers will tell you it's not for just end-of-life care.
Correct. I don't think it is, but it's not. And I wish I had understood that, because I would have done hospice much, much earlier than I did.
You have brought up so many of the things that we are going to be talking about on this podcast. Gerontologist, you're exactly right. The book that you mentioned, Being Mortal, I think it's Atul Gawande. I don't know how you say his last name, but
yes,
the author.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. He talks about having those conversations. They're not going to be here forever. None of us are. And so we have to have those conversations. But those are all things, the hospice care and those are all things that you don't know until you need to know. And then oftentimes you're kind of scrambling. And if I could have $1 for every time someone said, I wish I had utilized hospice care earlier than I did, I may be able to go on a nice trip. I don't know. But it's all important things, important points that you make, for sure.
Yep. Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End by Atul Gawande. So it's also in Audible form if you're an Audible person. What about a memorable moment, Leanne? What's a memorable moment from your experience, whether, funny, emotional, impactful, or otherwise? Something that stands out when you think about the whole process?
I think that the things that were memorable were, the good things were when my mom had salient moments. I mean, I'll share something else that so I was also caring for an elderly aunt with another woman, and my aunt is now 100, but she's living closer to this other woman. And this woman, God bless her, goes and reads to my aunt.
Aw.
Once or twice a week goes and reads to her, or takes photo albums to her. Once a week, and they go through the photo albums and they listen to their stories. And I share that because those are things, being 4 hours away and having 2 kids and my own and a full-time job, I wasn't able to do for my mom. So if you're close, right, those moments of things that they do remember, experiences that they do remember, listening to their stories, things like that, I think are really good. And then I think the other memorable times, unfortunately, are how difficult it was after she passed away to get through everything I needed to get through to handle the trust. And so that goes back to my thought about, communicate it down, share it, all that, so that everybody closely involved knows what decisions have been. And
that's a really good point.
I think I should also mention that about the cleaning out that house, and you talked about having a third party help. There's no way I could have physically or emotionally cleaned out that house.
Absolutely.
I just not having it. And so we kind of
there was a lot of memories that we got through. There were a lot of memories that we got through.
Right. So we did it. We were able to clean out things my mother couldn't see. Like I cleaned out the basement while she was still alive. I had a brother who cleaned out the upstairs while she was still, we could do things, but if she saw us taking anything out of the house, she would get very upset.
Right.
So having an estate sale professionals come in, and once we took everything we wanted, to have come in and sort through everything and sell it was a godsend. And I don't know if you want to mention the people we use. They do a great job.
Yes, we love our estate sellers. Shout out to Jess. We love our estate sellers for sure. Yeah, that's great. So what would you say is something that somebody ought to consider? What would you say to somebody who, might be looking ahead to this process with a loved one, or, what was some of your best advice?
Well, we're talking about the trust. I talked about communication. I think the only other thing is just one step at a time. It's so overwhelming to look at the whole job. And not only is it overwhelming for the child, it's overwhelming for the parents, the elderly person. It's hugely overwhelming to think about leaving the home you've been in for a long time, or getting rid of things that are, that remind you of great events in your life or happy times or whatever. That's very, very difficult. So one small step at a time. Every small step you can take moves you forward. It doesn't matter how small.
We say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
That's absolutely. I mean, for example, I sat down with my mom one, and I said, okay, I collected all the photos in the house, all the albums, all the loose photos. My mother didn't put many things in albums, so there were a lot of loose photos. And we sat down together and we went through them. She couldn't go very long, right? But I would, if it was scenery or neither one of us remembered people in in the picture, out it went.
Yeah.
Right.
And then labeled everything where she did remember who it was. And, and so that was one weekend, right? That was one weekend. The next time was Tupperware. So not a lot of memories there, but boy, was there a lot of that,
There was. So you had boundaries, and for like the pictures, I like that. If it was scenery or people we don't remember, it's going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've done that in my own photos too. Again,
for sure.
I think it's a kind of a reminder. I mean, I know we go on these trips and we want to take pictures of what we're seeing, but this is the reality. What are you going to do with those pictures? Nothing, So it's like, just live in the moment, skip the picture, take the pictures of the people that you love, but you don't need the pictures of the sunset at every morning of every trip.
A friend of mine said the postcards have better photos anyway. I have postcards.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, that's great. I like that advice. What you mentioned, like now that you've gone through this, things that you're going to do in your own life, and that's what that kind of leads into that next question. How has life changed for you after supporting, your mom's health as it declined, and then ultimately her estate?
Yeah. I think, people talk about it hits you at different times, or things come back to you at different times. Like I'll wake up and think, does mom have enough groceries? Do I need to call for grocery deliveries? And I'll remember, I don't have to do that anymore. So, I think the stress stays around a while. I think you have to give yourself a break. I talked to a friend who said her mom passed away 3 years ago, and she just now has the emotional strength to clean out the stuff she put in her basement from her mom's house. Right?
Wow.
So, it takes someone who's been in your life, it just takes time to get it. And the other thing I try to do is, talk about positive things. Like, quick example, my daughter just started teaching as a long-term substitute, and my mom was a teacher. I said, who would really get excited about this? And my daughter said,
yes.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great.
That presence around and
Mm-hmm.
talk about things when the times were good, right? When we had times. Is one way of dealing with it. I'm trying to deal with it. And I have to say, there is some relief. I think you have to acknowledge that even though a loved one has passed away, there's a relief that that particular stress is not in your life anymore.
Would you say it would be, in your mind, easier to sort of rip it off like a Band-Aid and just do everything all at once, or do sort of what your friend is doing and take your time if you had to choose?
I think it goes in stages. It's kind of not either one. Because I have another story from a friend's father, whose elderly father decided that he didn't want the family pictures anymore, and he pitched them all. He threw them all away. So he has no pictures of, other than what she had. She has no pictures of her childhood, no pictures of her, So you can't go that way either. You can't get rid of it all.
Right.
But getting it smaller and smaller and smaller, one step at a time, right? One sibling took everything they wanted. Another sibling took everything they wanted. I ended up with the things I wanted, plus whatever didn't sell anybody else wanted. So I have a little extra, but not a lot.
Yeah. Well, we so appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience with us and with the audience. I think that you touched on so much that you're definitely not the only one that has gone through something like this, or that will. And so being able to share your story with others, I think will will just really open the eyes to folks who are, this is looming over their head or will be one day. So we thank you so much, Leanne.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I hope it helps.
Okay.
Right.
Well, just some final words and wrap up. You want to go through that, Sara?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Leanne, and we will be back next Thursday with another podcast. So don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share. We appreciate all of that, and we'll see you next week.
Yes. Bye-bye.